Our whole job is to make building software at Amazon a really delightful experience and reduce all of the friction and the toil and the difficulties that builders experience with tools and other friction. And open source compliance and open source questions can introduce friction and slowness, right? And it disrupts your flow. So one of the big metrics that I look at is how can we reduce the tickets that developers have to file in order to get approval of licenses. That should be auto-approved, and we should really kind of automate it in our build and flow systems so that developers don't have to be disrupted there.
Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Hacking Open Source Business podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Yonkovit, once again joined by Avi Press. And today we're joined by Nithya Ruff from AWS. Nithya, how you doing today?
Hey, good. Really good to be here. Like, I think 2 miles away from where you live. And what a nice day here in North Carolina.
Yeah, we're enjoying the nice weather while it snows where Avi is, but he's going skiing, so he likes the snow. So
I'm okay with it in this case, but it's making driving very challenging.
So Nithya, we like to start with what we call rapid fire questions, and rapid fire questions just is to get to know you, where I ask some number between 10 and 173 questions to get answers from you, and they could range from all kinds of odd topics to just the mundane. So let's get started with those rapid fire questions, and don't fret, there's only potentially 173 of them. So the first one is, I know that you attend a lot of conferences, and you have spoken at a lot of conferences, including keynotes. So the question is, when they say, what music would you like us to play when you walk up to the stage? What music would you choose?
Gosh. I would say some sort of an Indian Bollywood dance music, maybe, and come dancing. That would be pretty cool. I haven't done that yet, so I do need to advise my next keynote person.
Yes, this would be awesome. I want to see that. Yes, that's great. And if you do come up with an actual, you pick a song, let us know. We're coming up with a playlist because we ask this to everybody, and so we want the playlist of guests, and we'll just make this great, playlist for everybody to listen to.
In fact, there's a song that's making its rounds on TikTok where everybody's dancing to it. Grandmothers and kids and, everybody around the world. And I'm learning that dance. I need to do that sometime before a keynote.
Oh, that sounds awesome. That sounds great. Yes. Yeah. So, that's great. As you walk up, you give your keynote, you're done. There's people who want to talk to you. So that means that afterwards people are going to, ask you, hey, can we grab something to drink? Can we go somewhere? What's the drink of choice after our conference?
Gosh, sparkling water.
Sparkling water. That's fine.
I really like this elderflower lemonade that I picked up at Whole Foods recently. It's delicious.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it does. It does. It does.
It's
Now,
thing.
That's fine. So if you are out to dinner with someone, what is the go-to food for you? What do you generally look for? Ooh, that sounds good. I always try and get fill in the blank.
I'm vegetarian. So wherever we go, I look for good vegetarian food. Ethiopian is awfully delicious from a vegetarian perspective. Indian food, of course, Mexican, Middle Eastern, all of them celebrate vegetarian food. So I love that. So any of those would be good choices.
Okay, great. Well, so shifting gear to actually, maybe a little bit of open source stuff. What is the first open source program you used?
I wouldn't talk about a program as much as a project that I was most closely associated with.
Sure.
I would say the Yocto project, which is an embedded Linux distribution builder, custom Linux distribution builder, was one of the first projects that I was deeply involved in, right from creating it at Wind River, Intel, and then open sourcing it, and then building community around it at the Linux Foundation. I was part of the the board, and I was part of the evangelism and advisory, and we still use Yocto today at Amazon, at Comcast, at all over the world. So I love the fact that I was associated with that project.
That's cool. Now, being on the board of the Linux Foundation, as well as being an OSPO and heading up an open source program office, you must have a favorite license.
Everybody's favorite today is Apache 2.0.
Okay, well, there you go. Apache 2.0. That's fine. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, some people are old school and go GPL. I don't think anybody likes the AGPL, but, hey.
Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. Yeah, Avi and I have argued about AGPL.
But a wave of relief because we use Apache 2 as well. So, validation.
What's not to like? Yeah.
Yeah. So, what book do you recommend to people who are trying to get into open source?
Gosh.
She has it right there.
She has the book in front of her. Look at that. It's serendipitous.
Because I refer to it all the time, especially chapter 19, which I wrote, and say, what did I say about OSPOs, right? And
yes.
But more importantly, I'm a huge fan of Amanda Brock, who is the editor of this book. Amanda is a force of nature. She recently had the State of Open Source Conference, but she's done a superb job of collecting 25 of the most experienced, the most knowledgeable people on the planet on open source. And she's written this book, which includes everything from law to policy to practice. I particularly focus on practice of open source. And so I would say this is a great book to have right by your desk. And it's not something that you would read back to back. I would use it as a reference book.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the OSPO side of things in a minute, Nithya actually wrote the chapter in the book on it. So, talk about
literally.
The go-to. Yes, literally.
Yes.
Yeah. So I do have a really important question that I'm hoping you can help me out with. I need to pick a restaurant. I always have trouble picking restaurants in Raleigh. Got to take the wife somewhere tomorrow. Where's your favorite restaurant? Where should I go?
Gosh, one of my favorite restaurants lately, and it's pretty close to us, Matt, in the north part of Raleigh, is the Cheney Food Emporium. And it's in the Falls of News type of area. And the chef is a good friend of mine, and she was recently a semifinalist for the James Beard Award. So I think you can't go wrong there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to check that out. So you might have saved me tomorrow from having to pick where we're going to dinner.
But we may have to go there again for All Things Open when I come out there.
There's good drinks. Also a little shopping area inside the Emporium. So while you're waiting for food, you can go shop for a cookbook or accoutrements and things like that.
Wow, awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I do. But let's get down to some business here. We wanted to talk to you a little bit about the OSPO role. One of the things that we're trying to do is help companies build out successful, sustainable open source businesses projects. And part of that is talking a little bit about, how do you manage the open source side of things? Because a lot of people are starting in the open source space. Maybe they have a project. Maybe they're starting to get a little successful. Maybe they're growing some contributors. They're like, I think I can make a commercial offering. I think I can do something with this. But they often don't know the next steps. So, I've seen many people define the term OSPO differently. Some people, it's very compliance related. Other people, it's contributor related. Other people, it's evangelist. It's a little bit of everything. Maybe share your view of what an OSPO does and some of the pros, cons there.
I think OSPOs can be different things to different companies because different companies have different requirements from their business perspective. This is my third OSPO that I'm running. And in each OSPO, the requirement was different, right? How does open source fit into your company? And what's the role of open source in your company? And in some companies, it's all about compliance. They want to make sure that they are respecting the license and making sure that, the developers know what the policy is and use the right licenses, etc. And in some companies, it starts with compliance, but goes way beyond that. It goes to evangelization. It goes to education of the the developers inside the company. It goes to sponsorship and engagement with communities that the company cares about. To be honest, a perfect OSPO or a well-rounded OSPO in my mind does all of those things. I call it the 6 C's of OSPOs. It does communication, consumption, contribution, community, compliance, and the sixth one is community, unless I used it before. But really,
It's okay. Community can be used twice because it's so important.
exactly. So that must have been a Freudian slip, a good slip. So I would say you've got to do all of this. Most companies start off consuming, then you have to put compliance and policy in order. Then people start contributing. So you have to put policies around contribution and encourage contribution. Then we start releasing and start building communities around the projects we release. And then you really need to uplift the community, right, with your engagement. You should share how you're doing things, best practices, participate in governance and boards, and participate in community, and do what's needed in the community to sustain it. So I would say that to me is leadership, and a few companies do it well. Red Hat comes to mind. They kind of are in all of these places. And we are on our journey to do all of that as well.
I have a probably dumb question to jump in with. A lot of people in our audience, I think, are building startups and are much more on the small company side of things. And when I hear a lot of the functions that you're saying an OSPO has, it sounds like things that on smaller teams are often very distributed, kind of throughout the whole company. What size of scale do you think does an OSPO really start to become an important thing where you actually kind of centralize a lot of that work to one team versus kind of keeping that something that the whole company has to think about? When is the right stage for the OSPO to really become an important piece?
I think when your legal team gets overwhelmed with the number of developers contacting them and asking questions and saying, can I use this? Can I contribute this? Can I do this? And then that was kind of the tipping point at a previous company I was at, where the legal team said, enough already. I think engineering, you need to own this. You need to have someone who acts as a developer advocate, works with developers, educates them, works on questions before they come to us. And that's also kind of a stage where companies say, this is really broad spread and it's being used everywhere, and we better put a policy in place. We better have consistent practices, and it's wasting too much time of our developers to do, all trying to research the same thing, trying to do the same thing. So I would say, it varies from company to company in terms of their consumption, right? But I agree with you that even small OSPOs small companies should have someone designated as the go-to person for, questions on open source, and should have kind of a rudimentary policy in place, and should have good hygiene around open source compliance and consumption and strategy and things like that.
I think we do. Avi, I think, to answer your question, I think a lot of people end up being accidental OSPOs.
Yes.
Or unintentional. Right. I mean, every company that I've worked with, size and no, there's somebody who is like, oh yeah, they're the open source expert. Maybe it's the head of engineering, maybe it's the DevRel person, maybe it's someone, but they end up being that deciding factor. Although what's interesting is, Nithya, you said something that at a lot of small companies, nobody asks the lawyers for permission. They ask for forgiveness later in many cases.
Yes.
So that function sometimes goes overlooked for a while until somebody decides, oh, we need to look into this. Oh, what are we using here? Do we have any risk? But yeah, so I think there's a lot of accidental OSPOs.
Definitely. And it's usually the guy or gal who seems to know, a little bit about open source and licenses and dabbles in it or goes to conferences and stuff, and people say, yeah, you seem to know a lot about open source, so can you kind of become our expert? But on the serious side, though, it's important for startups to have good hygiene around open source licensing, because often startups are acquisition targets for companies, And one of the due diligence that every company does is to make sure that they're not introducing any risk in the acquisition. And you need to have your stuff all in order.
If I could take a small little tangent, and this is just off the cuff of my head, just based on you saying that, is one of the things that has been coming up lately is with that kind of hygiene, which I 100% agree with, that, somebody needs to look out for it because there is risk. And it's not just risk from a license perspective. There's also risk from a security perspective and knowing what is, potentially vulnerable. But the introduction of AI and AI coding tools introduces a weird nuance to this, where the provenance of certain code may not be known if somebody's using one of these tools. Now, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, and you could just say, no, I don't really at this time, and we can move on. But I thought I'd bring it up because it's an interesting topic.
It is an interesting topic, and I have no thoughts right now on it. Okay. I'm still playing on it.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. I literally just got that question today from someone on our team about what is our policy on this? And I had to say, we're going to have to get back on that. It's a really hard question. It's a tough question. Yeah.
It's precisely, Avi. I think it is too early and it is not ready for prime time is my answer right now.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of nuance down the road that we're going to have to deal with. Maybe that's some of that cleanup that we've got to do later on.
Yep. Yeah. Or we need to go decide how we are going to treat this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess on another note, on this podcast, we always love to dig into things related to metrics. Matt has his metrics hat on. As someone, running an OSPO, presumably one of the biggest, I imagine. What kinds of things are you looking at when it comes to measuring the outcomes that your OSPO brings? What does your dashboard look like? What are the KPIs?
Some of the biggest dashboards. So our whole job as an OSPO, and I'm part of the Amazon Software Builder Experience organization. Our whole job is to make building software at Amazon a really delightful experience and reduce all of the friction and the toil and the difficulties that builders experience with tools and other friction. And open source compliance and open source questions can introduce friction and slowness, right? And it disrupts your flow. So one of the big metrics that I look at is how can we reduce the tickets that developers have to file in order to get approval of licenses. That should be auto-approved, and we should really kind of automate it in our build and flow systems so that developers don't have to be disrupted there. And then we are also looking at how can we simplify and auto-approve simple contributions, simple releases, simple distributions so that they never have to come and file a ticket and spend weeks with us, trying to get everything approved. So our answer is how can we get developers to really go off and innovate without, speed bumps. That's one big metric. And then my colleague on the marketing side, David Nelly and team, often measure things like the health of projects that we host, health of projects that we contribute to and we are dependent upon. They spend a lot of time supporting developers on GitHub sponsors, and they give a lot of cloud credit. So they keep track of a lot of those kinds of things. How engaged are we? How are we working in community? What projects do we want to support and help, and things of that nature. So I would say both sides we kind of look at.
And so, just for the sake of the audience, when you talk about your colleague, you're focused a lot on the internal and the engineering side. They're focused more on the marketing awareness, community, external side, correct?
Correct. So there's an example of an OSPO, where we have two big groups that are working very, very tightly together to cover both sides of the coin. That's correct.
Okay. And out of curiosity, ballpark, how many open source projects do you end up contributing to in a year? Just ballpark number.
I can't even keep track of it. I think we contribute a lot of projects just because we consume a lot. It's so foundational to how we build and how we innovate in the company, and also the services that we provide. Right, we do a lot of managed services of open source projects like Kubernetes and Airflow and Apache Airflow and things of that nature. So we definitely contribute to those projects. And then there are also projects like OpenJDK that we contribute to, or Rust, which we contribute to. Then we've open sourced, projects like Bottle Rocket and Firecracker, and of course, OpenSearch, which we support. So there's a ton of activity happening all the time. From a scale, from when I was at Comcast, we were doing maybe 50, 60 projects or so. But here, I would say in the hundreds or thousands, maybe. We don't keep track of it.
I mean, that's tough though. Like with that many, just managing that is a challenge in and of itself. But working with those external communities, that's also adds a nuance, because it's not just about here's a PR and then you forget about it. There's more than that, because just because the PR submitted upstream doesn't mean it will get accepted. And even if it does get accepted, doesn't mean it's in a release that you can use. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to make those happen.
Yes, and to be honest, we call developers builders inside the company because they build things for our customers, and they really are at the forefront of all this. So the Postgres SQL team, work very closely with the upstream community. The Kubernetes services team works very closely with the Kubernetes community, Containerd, and so on and so forth. So we just provide the guidance to them and smooth down the approvals and resolve all of those. We do consulting work with the organization. They'll have a question on should we or should we not do this, or how should we do this, or how do we build community here, or how do we engage with this community here. And we definitely get involved there, because between David's team and my team, we have a lot of people who have been in open source for decades, like Spot, Tom Calloway, or Rich Bowen, or David Nelly, or myself, or Henry Yondel. So there's just so many great people who've been involved with Apache or with the Linux Foundation, etc. So we do a lot of work to what I call is help teams be good citizens in open source and do the right thing. So we just want to make sure that doing the right thing is built into the operations and the fabric of how we work.
That's very interesting. I mean, this is really like a broad question, but I'm curious, like to Amazon, what does that actually mean to be a good open source citizen? I've seen people try to take swings at defining that, and it's very hard to do. So I'm curious how you think about that at Amazon.
I think it's a work in progress for everyone, right? Because open source is so diverse and every community is different, every situation is different. So all we can do is respect the norms of that community and that organization, and do our best to help them with whatever they need. If they need contributions, if they need money, if they need a maintainer kind of work, we try to do that. And all companies, and I've run 3 OSPOs, we all have to balance doing good with also making sense from an investment perspective, right? I'm sure you have to say, what is the impact and how do I justify this investment? And am I doing the right level of investment in this? So we go through those questions all the time.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is many people don't consider how much of a vested interest large companies, whether it's Amazon or Comcast, Rebel, or other enterprises, have in the success of these open source projects, because they need them to be successful. So it's not just about code contributions and donations or sponsorships. It's also about trying to make sure that they have a healthy ecosystem. And that's why in a lot of cases, you'll see, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or Google or any of these larger corporations, they'll be at these conferences, even smaller conferences, and they'll have a presence there. And it's something that I think a lot of people take for granted, that there is a vested interest in, the success of these open source projects.
Exactly right, Matt. I mean, all of us want to see open source succeed. We want to see it being sustained because more than ever, we are dependent upon open source, and it is the foundation of a lot of our tech stacks. And we need to make sure that it is sustained and successful. The degree to which you do that varies, and it's I think an ongoing journey to articulate why you need to do that better and better inside a company, and make the business case for why we need to do this.
Now, what's interesting is these larger organizations, but even smaller ones, you bring in such diverse talent and such, people coming from different backgrounds, different expectations, and not all of them understand open source or necessarily have the same goals in mind, right? So you could have pressure to monetize something. You can have pressure to really open source something that maybe might not make sense. So you have pressures on both sides. And part of that organization and governance is managing the complexities of competing, ideals, cultures, clashes, and how do you do that? Because with a team as large as Amazon's engineering team, a team as large as the builders, you have to have a lot of people who just think differently.
Yes, and you probably have a really wide variety of reasons and motivations, right, for what they want to do. I think we bring together a lot of different functions to make those decisions. So if someone is trying to, say, release a project, we try to do the due diligence of, is this right for the business? Is there a need for this project in the world? If there are other projects that do similar things, why aren't we contributing it to that project as a feature versus, starting a brand new project? Are we capable of supporting it once we release it? Have we dedicated headcount to making sure that we're not just throwing it over the wall and walking away? And is this the right choice? What is the outcome we are driving? Who's the community that we need to work with? So we try to bring together the legal side of things, the business side of things. We, as open source program office, we advocate for how to do it right, how to set up the community right. And then we have the marketing team also join us. So we all help these teams think it through correctly. And that I've seen we've done this at Comcast also. It really helps balance out the thinking when you have people saying, why are we doing this? Is it because you want to build a name in open source for yourself, or is it because you genuinely see a need there, for this project?
Yeah. I think a lot of people want to build the name. A lot of people are looking for the, for certain outcomes, and they don't always align with the organization or, the ideals that you might aspire to. So that's always a challenge.
I mean, at the end of the day, even universities have certain norms, right? Universities have OSPOs. I sit on the advisory board for RIT and for University of California, Santa Cruz. And both of them also have their policies and norms. So you don't just go contribute anything and everything. You want to make sure that it aligns with your, strategies and plans, but it also is supported successfully. The worst case for me is, letting everything and anything go and not supporting it. I think that's the worst crime than, holding something back.
So,
go for it, man.
Okay, that's fine. So, yeah, I was deferring to Avi, letting him ask a question if he wanted, but I want to shift gears a little bit because you also have a prominent role at the Linux Foundation. And tell us a little bit about your role at the Linux Foundation and what you're doing there.
So it was, I think, 2016 or 17 that the LF was looking to build community representatives on the board. a lot of the seats on the board typically are member companies, right, who are becoming members of the LF at a certain level. But Jim and the board wanted to invite community members to the board as well. So they made about 3 or 4 seats available for community members. And so I was asked to join and to be a community member. So I do not represent Amazon on the board. I represent the community, open source community, and myself. And I speak from a community perspective. And so, I joined the board in 2017, and then I was elected chair of the board in 2019. So I've been working as chair of the board. The LF is so well funded, staffed, and run that the board is not someone who has to pinch hit and do a lot of work. I've sat on nonprofit boards where I have to do a lot of work because there's hardly any staff, right? So everybody is volunteering and doing work. I suspect certain foundations are like that because volunteers are, board members and volunteers are doing a lot of the work. I am there to make sure that the voice of the community is heard, the voice of diversity is heard on the board, to make sure that, I consider myself as being kind of a conscience and making sure that we are heading in the right direction, asking tough questions, looking around corners, those kinds of things. But we have such a fantastic board. The other folks who sit on the board for community are Erica Brescia, whom you know, and also Eileen. I forget Eileen's last name. I feel embarrassed. But Eileen...
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah. We can put it in the show notes. So we have some really good board members, and Stormy Peters just recently was elected to the board from GitHub, and I'm very excited to be part of the board. It really attend board meetings, provide guidance on direction. I do a lot of evangelization work also for the LF, which I enjoy doing. So these are all part of what I do there.
When it comes to, asking LF the hard questions, what do you see as kind of the biggest, either directional shifts that you may be advocating for, or kind of really hard open problems on the horizon that you see? Like what are kind of those top items to you?
I think one of the top items we worked on was how can we mentor and open doors for new people into open source. And LF had already been trying to do some of those things, but we started doing that more systematically in conferences, making sure we had code of conducts. There's a Linux kernel mentorship program. So that was very, very important to me. And then really kind of looking at growth strategies, right? Should we or should we not host a certain project? And one of the common questions that often comes up is the LF too big? Are we taking on too many things? But it's interesting that because the LF was very successful in doing things, a lot of companies and a lot of organizations come to them and say, can you please host this? Because you're good at marketing, you're good at, the IP and the legal side, and you provide a lot of opportunities for others to collaborate here. And I'm glad that there are many models in the industry. There's everything from Software Freedom Conservancy to Apache to Eclipse to LF to so it serves the needs of the community. I think lots of different ways to host and manage open source communities. The other I would say is really listening to the voice of the community, and because one of our stakeholders is member companies, and so we also need to look at and balance it with developers who contribute to our projects and engaging developers and respecting what they bring to the table.
So I'm going to ask a question. Maybe we can peek behind the LF board curtain or the LF curtain just a little bit and ask the question, when you are considering a new project, are there certain criteria that generally are looked at? Are there things people should be aware of, like, oh, make sure you have these types of things, or these are the types of areas we're really focused on?
I think the CNCF and others have done a good job of saying, hey, if you want to come into the sandbox, you need to demonstrate that you've already done good work on building community, that this is a project that, people want to contribute to, that there is a healthy community behind it, and a maintainer, etc. So I think those are all really good criteria, because you don't want to just shift something there because you no longer have a need for it. And Mike Dolan and his team do a really good job of looking at all the other criteria that they take into account before hosting it. They also provide a lot of different ways to host it. You can do it, without cost, without raising any money or charging for it, to a member supported model, to you can be a part of a larger sub foundation like the CNCF, which has lots and lots of projects around it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they kind of provide a lot of different models for people to participate in.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that, again, we'll go back to the metricsy thing. I wonder if, like, companies trying to submit, or they're like, here's our pitch deck to get in, like they've got like all the metrics laid out, like, look at our growth rates, our Slack numbers and BRs and contributors. And, it's like that kind of pitch to, make it up to the big leagues. I'm not sure if they're doing that or not, but that is interesting.
Have to. I think if you look at a submission, I remember submitting 2 projects at Comcast. We had to show all of those types of metrics to show that these projects deserve to be, part of the sandbox. And I think they then have criteria for getting out of the sandbox into, fully graduated projects and stuff. And the Apache Foundation also has similar criteria. Eclipse does too, which is exactly the right thing. You don't want to just dump and run, right? You want to know that the maintainer will come over and will continue to, maintain this project, and not just say, I'm moving it to the LF so that some, others can take care of this problem for me.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand that.
And I imagine with all the work that the LF is doing with the LFX Insights platform too, I think it seems like it's kind of going in this broader direction of just more data-driven decision-making, I guess, at the foundation level, which is very cool to see. Yeah.
Because members need certain metrics, and then the person running the project as an executive director needs metrics, and developers want metrics. So I like the fact that it is a foundation as a service, so to speak, right? And it gives you a chance to do all of the things you need to do in a project. You need to communicate, you need to host the project, you need to raise money and marketing and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So I know we're almost out of time here, but I'm hoping we have a chance to get this one last question out there. And it is the crystal ball question. It's the thing that everybody always asks, and it's, Nithya, you're looking in your crystal ball. Is there something that you're really excited about in the open source space over the next year? And maybe something that worries you a little bit that you think we need to get ahead of, or maybe pay closer attention to?
I'm such an optimistic person about open source. I think open source is goodness, and we continue to mature it as part of the community. I'm really excited about how Africa and other countries are coming on board and becoming, contributors and frankly changing their lives as a result of becoming a part of open source. There's this young woman, Ruth, who stays in touch with me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and she just joined Bitergia as a consultant.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She started 2-3 years ago as attending a conference in Africa, and then starting to contribute to a project and becoming part of a mentorship. And so it's wonderful to see how it's changing lives. And
I
see more of that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Things I worry about. I think we really need to protect and preserve the open source definition and make sure that we are preserving the freedoms of open source and not just uh, modifying it and changing it as we think fit. Granted, I'm not someone who's a traditionalist who says, this cannot ever change. We have to change with times, but the freedoms of open source is what makes it successful. And I would hate to see us modify that or play with it.
Indeed. Well, Nithya, I want to thank you for hanging out with us today, for chatting a little bit, telling us a little bit about the LF, AWS, about everything going on in the OSPO space. We do appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, everybody, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us. Give us suggestions for new content and new guests. We'd love to hear from you.